They picked a spot called Leechmere, and Leechmere is really secretive. Nobody lives there because it's a swamp. So the first wave of redcoats lands in the swamp and stands there up to their hips in swamp water until the boats go back and get the other wave, and then go back and get the other wave. And then once they all get there, Colonel Smith stands up there, looks at how pretty all those redcoats are, all in a nice row, and he starts figuring out, well, you're the first regiment. You're the king's most honorable. I'll put you in the front, and you're regiment number 2, and you should go there. So he spends hours and hours lining up all these guys, and meanwhile, Paul Revere's out there getting the job done, right? So as the British are plodding along towards Lexington, now without knowing that they even had scouts out there, they find these scouts running towards them saying, the countryside is going to be filled with militia. There's 500 of them waiting at just Lexington alone for us. So instead of walking with unloaded muskets, Major Pitcairn, who's the second in command, gives them the load command. So they all load up and march toward Lexington. And since Colonel Smith, the guy who's really the first command, he says, wow, we're in big trouble. So Pitcairn, why don't you go ahead and you take the fastest guy you can think of to lead our column down the road. I want him to set the pace. So Pitcairn looks around and goes, I got the perfect guy. Jesse Adair, I'm going to put you right at the front, and you're going to whip these guys into shape. They're going to follow you into hell. Wherever you lead them, they'll follow you, right? So Jesse Adair, finally he's put in charge of something, gets to the front of this redcoat line, marches straight towards Lexington. He doesn't even know Lexington's out there. He doesn't know that they're supposed to go to Concord. He just starts marching as fast as he can. And he comes upon Lexington Green. When he finally gets to Lexington Green, Lexington Green kind of breaks two ways. There's a fork on the road where the green is. So they're coming up Mass Ave this way. And they could go north towards Bedford, or they can go west on the other part of the fork. West leads them to Concord. But Jesse Adair doesn't know this, and he doesn't even know that they're going to Concord. All he sees is that on the north fork of the road, there are several dozen Lexington militia standing there. And he thinks to himself, who are these guys to be standing there, kind of as a show of force against the King's army? So instead of stopping to ask which section of the fork he's going to go down, because he doesn't know, he's the kind of shoot first, ask later guy, right? So he marches straight up that fork, right into the mouth of danger, towards the Lexington militia, starts yelling at them to lay down their arms. Now, who's the Lexington militia, right? Well, they only had about 37 guys standing out there. That's because Paul Revere rode through town, told them that the redcoats were on their way. Captain John Parker, veteran of the French-Indian War, one of Rogers' Rangers. You guys ever heard of Rogers' Rangers? The U.S. Army Rangers now, you'll see Rogers' Rangers rules on in their manual and stuff. This was the original fight in the wilderness kind of group, was Rogers' Rangers. That was the first, at least for the British anyway. So he was one of Rogers' Rangers. So as this guy Paul Revere, rides through town, rides out, tells him this crazy story that 800 redcoats are coming up the road, he trusts but verifies. So he sends out 2 scouting parties to go figure out what's coming up the road. Well, first party goes down the road, comes back, and says, I don't know what that guy Paul Revere was talking about, but there's nobody coming up the road. So Captain John Parker says, man, all right, well, you guys are all dismissed, because he had actually 77 guys in this militia. So he dismissed them all, and that's actually what that sound was that Paul Revere's captors heard, because most of them, instead of going to sleep, went over to the bar. And etiquette back then was, if you're going to go to the bar and start drinking, you would unload your musket first. You don't walk into a bar with a loaded musket and start having a party, right? So, and they were all lined up on the green, and the bar is like right there next to the green, right? So it's a very obvious choice. So they all go over to Buckman's Tavern, unload by shooting their muskets in the air, and start drinking. Another bunch of them go to sleep. And meanwhile, those redcoats are still coming up the road, right? The second scouting party gets trapped behind them and actually can't make it back to Lexington until the very, very end. And when that second scouting party comes back, they give them the news that not only are there 800 redcoats coming to town, but they're already in town. So John Parker quickly gets everybody together he can, and he only gets 30-something of them from the bar. So they all come out, they're standing on the green, and here come the redcoats. Jesse Adair at the front, telling these guys to lay down their arms, disperse, and they're all looking to Captain John Parker for direction. And Parker had already told them that don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have war, let it begin here. Those words are on a stone right on the line of where those men stood. And those were their orders beforehand. They're all waiting, for the redcoats to fire first. Adair is yelling at them. Then, riding up from just behind Adair, the guy second in command of the redcoats, Major Pitcairn, he rides up on a horse in between these two lines. And these two lines are real close to each other. They're about from here to the targets. Line of 37 guys here, line of 800 redcoats starting there. And as these lines are yelling, cursing at each other, Pitcairn rides in with his horse, starts waving a sword around, saying, disperse, you damn rebels, you villains, disperse. And you know what? That's exactly what they did. Captain Parker gives them the order to disperse. They turn around, but they don't lay down their arms. And then a shot rings out. And this is the shot, even though technically the shot heard around the world was the one in Concord around the poem. I'll call this one the shot heard around the world because nobody actually saw who fired it. But everybody heard what it sounded like. And all reports were that it sounded like a pistol and not a musket. So Paul Revere's guys having no Captain Parker's guys having no pistols were definitely not the ones who fired that shot. It either came from a British officer, which were the only guys around having pistols, or from out in the woods. And either way, it wasn't John Parker's guys that got hit. But upon hearing that first musket, a ragged volley erupted from the rest of the redcoats. Bang, 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 bang. They all started shooting, and they cut down, mostly from behind, 8 men of Lexington, and wounded 11 more as they were turned around and heading towards their homes. There was one guy, Jonathan Harrington, who was, the green was right in front of his house. He was shot in the back and crawled to his doorstep, where his wife saw him die right in the door frame. There was 2 members of Captain Parker's family killed. One from bayoneted in the back. The other was one of the only 2 people. One of them was, there were only 2 guys that were killed facing forward out of the entire Lexington militia. There were 8 pairs of father and son on the green that morning out of the 37 people, and 5 of those pairs were separated by a death. And that was the redcoats marching on their own people in their own country. This was not a foreign army invading. This was our own army coming on our own doorsteps and killing us right where we stood. They started going to the houses until finally Colonel Smith rides up from the back and grabs a drummer, and the drummer starts drumming and brings everybody back to the center. And after killing 8, wounding 11, those redcoats stood on the green, again with their own countrymen laying right next to them, shouted huzzah 3 times, and fired a victory shot in the air.